former head of the British Army, Lord Dannatt. Lord Dannatt, lovely to see you this morning. A year on from the fall of Kabul, the Home Secretary Priti Patel has been expressing her tremendous pride about the government's government's evacuation. Do you share in that pride, with the benefit of course, of hindsight?
Well, I've got huge pride in the way that the soldiers that we sent to Kabul carried out their duties in what was undeniably a chaotic situation. Yes, we managed to get quite a number of entitled people out, but we left a tremendous number of people there. But, you know, Neil, this begs a whole wider question. Why did that happen? Why were those circumstances allowed to take place? Frankly, I believed at the time it was unnecessary. A year later, it was unnecessary. And as your report has shown, Afghanistan is in terrible condition at the present moment. And if we reflect on why we spent 20 years in Afghanistan, yes, we achieved what we originally wanted to achieve, which was to contain al-Qaeda so they couldn't carry out more attacks in the West. But most particularly, we spent those 20 years building up Afghan society, giving Afghan society, Afghan people, a future and some hope. And it is therefore tragic that we quite unnecessarily withdrew in precipitate haste a year ago, but then I think absolutely outrageously have cut aid to Afghanistan, such that the babies are in a condition that your film has just shown. Right across the country, people are starving. We went there to help the Afghan people, and now we're just actually watching them suffer. I think it's outrageous, and I think Priti Patel and other members of the government should take no pride in what is happening there. They should be starting again, as should the Americans, who are principally responsible for what happened, should be significantly increasing their aid packages again to allow the people to have food and to thrive in Afghanistan, and not to have television films such as you've shown everybody, showing what pitiful condition that they are in. Is there pride? Yes, pride in our soldiers. Is there pride in what our government and international governments are doing? No, not at all.
Yeah, I'm watching Stuart's report this morning before coming on the programme. It's difficult not to have been moved by it. But just talk a little bit more then about your experience in country, the assistance that the British did give during that 20-year period. I was on the ground a few times with British forces, saw the Hearts and Minds efforts, saw the education of children in a way which had never been done before. All of that progress, it would seem, has now been rolled back by a Taliban that resembles the Taliban of 2001.
Yes, I think we all have to acknowledge that the Taliban are repressive. But again, it comes back to the question. We went to Afghanistan to help the people of Afghanistan. Now we're making films watching the people of Afghanistan suffer. Yes, we may not like the Taliban. We may not like their attitude, I certainly don't, towards women and girls and stopping girls going to secondary education. But just because we don't like their human rights record, and of course it's a big issue, but because we don't like their human rights record and a number of the things that they're doing, we are withholding aid from the people of that country such that babies are dying, people are starving, and it's not for want of food in the country, it's for want of money to be able to buy it. We have starved the place of cash in an economy that was made up by about 80% of international aid, forming the cash flow of that country. So we could change this, we could stop this. We actually could help the people of Afghanistan. And I believe that diplomats and statesmen should be thinking seriously about starting aid again to Afghanistan and using that aid to leverage on the Taliban to get them to change some of the attitudes that they take, particularly towards women and girls secondary education.
Just to be clear, though, about what you're saying there, Lord Dannatt, I mean, given the fact that 60% of Afghanistan is currently suffering from malnutrition, their gold reserves are still frozen, there has been a stop to aid. I mean, are we in the West, then, essentially responsible, perhaps even more responsible than the Taliban, for what Stuart was seeing in the hospitals?
Well, put it bluntly, the American decision, initially by Donald Trump and then agreed by Joe Biden, that the Americans would leave Afghanistan by August last year, which was a unilateral decision about which we were not consulted and other partners were not consulted. That decision directly led to the collapse of the Afghan National Army, the Afghan National Police, and allowed the Taliban to take over the country. That having happened, the West has said, well, we don't like the Taliban, so we're going to cut off aid to this country. And having cut off aid to Afghanistan, That is why babies are dying in hospitals. That is why people are starving up and down the country. Now, is that right? As I said before, we spent 20 years building up Afghanistan society. We spent 20 years helping the people. Why should we suddenly stop helping the people now? Because we don't like the Taliban. Frankly, yes, their human rights record is not good. They have stopped second girls going to secondary school. But is that the right price to pay for the majority of Afghan people to be starving and babies to be dying? I don't think so. I think we've got this terribly wrong, and governments need to wake up, start the flow of aid again, and give the Afghan people, for whom we tried to help them for 20 years, give them a prospect of a future, while bearing down on the Taliban to say, come on, you actually got to behave like a civilized country, a civilized government, or otherwise you'll never take your proper place in the world.
It is part of the situation that we're seeing at the moment, perhaps, that many of the world's eyes are elsewhere. In fact, Afghanistan is a topic rarely discussed around the dinner tables these days. I mean, last August, you were speaking to us on the channel. You said, look, something terrible will happen elsewhere. The world's media will move on, and this is when the Taliban will enforce their harsh regime. I mean, did that happen in terms of Ukraine?
Well, of course it did. The Disasters Emergency Committee, for example, launched an appeal this time last year to raise funds for Afghanistan. But quite quickly, come February this year, they launched an appeal for Ukraine, and that raised over £300 million. And it's not as if it's Ukraine that's actually pushed Afghanistan off the news. Now the cost of living crisis and the energy cost increases have almost pushed Ukraine off the news. We are very short-termist in terms of our intervention. And it comes back to my basic point. We spent 20 years trying to build up Afghan society and help Afghan people. Why do we walk away now and watch films a year on, such as the one that you're showing people this morning, of babies dying and people starving? Frankly, we've got to be prepared to have longer engagements in these countries if we think human life is worth preserving. Otherwise, we'll just watch them all perish.